Team coverage of the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. At this hour, we do not know where he or his wife are.
In the meantime, though, we want to get some answers as to what we do know, because there is a federal indictment out for Maduro. Let's get over to our Jim DeFede to kind of walk us through this indictment. Now, Jim, we have it in hand right here. I've been looking through it. There's a lot of charges in here. This looks like it's an indictment from 2020.
That's correct. I would expect that there's probably been a newer indictment, a superseding indictment that has probably been or will be unsealed shortly after his arrest. But what we do know is this does provide an interesting roadmap. So what the government, basically found in 2020 in charging Maduro was that he had allowed the country and the institutions of the country to become a vehicle for drug trafficking, specifically cocaine, and that he had worked in allegiance with, for instance, the FARC in Colombia to transport cocaine for basically to line their own pockets. So that was an issue that was clearly one that was already being discussed back in 2020, where the United States government branded Maduro a narco-terrorist at that time. Now, one of the other interesting things is that this indictment does not include, the 2020 indictment does not include his wife. So when we're hearing from Attorney General Pam Bondi that she is also facing criminal charges, that's another indication that there's probably a more current, newer superseding indictment that will name her as well, that will likely be unsealed in the days and hours ahead.
You know, Jim, none of this really should be much of a surprise to people in that there's been a lot of ramp up to where we are today.
No, I think there's a little bit of surprise as to the nature of this action. Let's be clear, this was a stunning military move that was clearly in the works for probably weeks ahead of time. You have to have people on the ground, CIA assets, military assets, sort of scouting out to know exactly where Nicolás Maduro was in the country. Also targeting those very specific, probably anti-aircraft sites that could have interfered with this operation and taking those out. So this was meticulously planned by special forces in the U.S. military that was probably being run out of the Tampa area, as well as the U.S. Southern Command here in Doral. So it was a stunning move militarily, but you're right. It doesn't come as a surprise that there was going to be some action taken against Venezuela, given the buildup, Donald Trump moving so many U.S. military assets there. Was it simply just sort of an attempt to bully him out of power? Well, we now know that it wasn't. But one other thing that I will note, and I thought it was interesting in the first segment, you showing information, or you're showing a clip from the defense minister, Vladimir Pedrino Lopez. I'll also note, Vladimir Pedrino Lopez is also under indictment in the United States. At that same time that Nicolás Maduro was indicted in 2020 in the Southern District of New York, Pedrino Lopez was indicted in the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. on the same types of charges. So the fact that he has remained, the fact that so many others who were listed in the indictment are still in Venezuela is a curious thing, because if you were going to try to take out everyone involved in the indictment, then you would have thought that you might have also moved against Pedrino Lopez. I'll also say this, there has been some speculation and some interest as to whether or not U.S. had contact with various military officials inside of Venezuela to sort of smooth the way for this operation. That seems increasingly unlikely, given the fact that the defense minister is now on TV, rallying the country to the country's side right now, to the current vice president, now acting president's side there in Venezuela.
Yeah, not only the defense minister, but the Venezuelan attorney general made television remarks condemning this attack, saying, quote, "Innocent victims have been mortally wounded and others killed by this criminal terrorist attack." That's what they're calling this action by the U.S. And I want to dive deep into that a little bit with you for what you're able to tell us this morning, because like you said, this may not seem as a complete surprise, but I don't think people expected to wake up this morning and see that the country was struck by bombs from the United States and that the leader was taken out of the country. But there was some reporting earlier this morning by experts that were saying that this may have been in the works since around Christmas time, which begs the question, did Congress have any involvement in this? Did the president consult with Congress? Did they give any kind of approval to this?
Well, we don't know that that answer yet. Obviously, before an action like this would be taken, at the bare minimum, you would expect that the so-called Gang of Eight, which are basically the Speaker of the House, the Democratic leader in the House, the Senate President, the Democratic leader in the Senate, as well as the chair and ranking member of both intelligence committees in both the House and the Senate, the 8 members that comprise the Gang of Eight, that they would have been briefed in advance. We don't know yet whether or not any of them were given advance warning. Clearly, there were some tweets, first off, by members of the Senate, Ruben Gallego, a Democrat from Arizona, calling into question this and saying that they were not, that the Congress was not briefed at all about any of these actions. In fact, Ruben Gallego claims that he asked very specific questions of members of both Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, and Marco Rubio, who denied that anything like this was in the planning. So we'll see how this plays out. I think that it's really very, very early to know how this does all play out. I know that Steve Majiri was talking about folks being eager to get back to Caracas. I think the situation in Venezuela right now is very unsteady. First off, we should note that airspace is still shut down over Venezuela, so there are no U.S. domestic flights flying into Venezuela and probably won't be anytime soon. The question really does become, how do the Venezuelan people perceive this? Now, in the last election that Nicolás Maduro ran in, there was widespread fraud. Nobody in the international community believes that Nicolás Maduro was reelected, that the election was fraudulent, and Maria Corina Machado and her party prevailed. Well, it's going to be interesting to see if she suddenly appears in Venezuela anytime soon and comes out publicly and starts talking. It'll be interesting if her supporters take to the streets, because right now it appears, from what we're seeing, is that the military and others, like the militias, the neighborhood militias, are taking to the streets. Whether or not the people will take to the streets, that's the real question right now.
There are so many questions surrounding this, Jim. We're going to try to walk through them one by one as we can come up with some answers from the experts, people like you. Thank you for joining us this morning. We'll continue to contact you and be in touch with you this morning as we get more live reports coming out of not only the country, but from here in South Florida. Stay tuned.
Thanks, Jim.